Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Joy Windronen. I'm a partner here at the Wheelhouse Group, and I am super excited to host today's second annual Public Service Recognition Week Story Jam. Try and say that about 3 times fast. So for those of you that don't know, we launched the Stories of Change initiative last year. And we really did it as a way to give voice to all of these remarkable stories that we are hearing from many people in government, really stories of resilience and innovation that were happening in times of great challenge. And our hope in starting this initiative was to create a place in a community where we could learn from each other. And by sharing these experiences, we could all collectively become better drivers of change here in government. So if this is your first Story Jam, and I think we do have a lot of people who are here for the first time, I really encourage you to go to our website and read and watch all the awesome resources that this community has created over the past year. So that link is wheelhousegroup.com/stories of change. And we will be posting links like that in the chat. I know that some of you, especially those of you at the White House, have firewall issues and can't access the chat. So I'll try to read those as well. And then we will have the chat available after the session for those that you want to see it. So it looks like we have a great crowd today, people calling in from all over. I see Ashburn, I see Virginia, I see Washington, D.C., someone calling in from Charlottesville. So it looks like we have a good sampling. We got somebody calling in from Boston. So just really excited to see so many faces. Well, right now it's more your headshots, but excited to see so many people here calling in today. So before we get started, I just want to take a moment to pause and thank everybody who serves in government. I know we can kind of overlook this week as we go about our normal day-to-day jobs, but it truly is an honor to work with so many innovative and committed leaders. And I encourage anyone who hasn't done so to take a minute and go to the Partnership for Public Services website. It's PSRW for Public Service Recognition Week, psrw.ourpublicservice.org. And they have some really great resources and discount codes, but they also have a survey called I Serve Because. And they too are collecting stories and sharing what you all do and sharing those in newsletters and on their website. So I encourage you to take a moment, visit there. It is in the chat. So just as a reminder, in 2021, Wheelhouse Group was asked to join the Digital Services Coalition. We affectionately refer to it as DSC. And we'll put a link in the chat if you haven't heard about the Digital Services Coalition. But we are really focused on bringing a focus to the people side of digital transformation with the DSC. And through that organization, we are introduced to many new partners. And we have heard many stories of how this group is redefining how government goes digital. So we decided in 2021 to really focus our stories and these events, such as the one today, on digital transformation. And with that in mind, we invited and are so excited to partner and collaborate with Tracy Walker, who's the executive director of the DSC, and she has graciously agreed to moderate this discussion here today. And Tracy has a long career in public service, working hard both in government and outside of government. And I'm excited to learn more about her and the speakers that are coming up in a few minutes. But before I turn it over, I get to go through a few administrative details. So bear with me just a few seconds longer, and then we'll jump into the meat of the session. So as you can probably see, this session is being recorded. And we do that so that we can post it on the website afterwards so that you can share it with others. I also do want to point out that you can find full speaker biographies and links on our website at the Stories of Change site. We won't be going through those in detail, so you can access them and learn more about each of our speakers there. And just as a reminder about format, today's session is really part storytelling and part discussion. So be ready with your questions as we want to keep it interactive. But I do ask that we be respectful of the special space we're creating here together. And some of the ways to do that are to make sure to keep yourself on mute. And we're going to ask everyone to stay off camera unless you're speaking. And if you would like to, I encourage you to click on the more or 3 dots by your name and include your name and organization and pronouns if you like. And so that helps if you're called on to, if you want to put any questions in the chat and we call on you, we will be able to call you by name, and you can take yourself off of mute and turn on the camera if you would like and introduce yourself. So before we get started, the last thing is, like we usually do in Story Jam, we are going to have chats and polls going on throughout. So we're going to go ahead and do the first poll. For those of you that can access the poll, it will go ahead and it'll just pop up on your screen. And you can, I know there's a lot of things going on your screen with Zoom. So if you want, you can click on it and move it to a different part of your screen, wherever you want. And then you can choose your answer, submit the poll, and then the results will show up on your screen. So if we go ahead and put up poll number 1, this is really an opportunity for us to get to know you better. Cindy, I'm not seeing the poll pop up yet.
I have it up, Joy, when it might be because it said your polling capabilities are over, are ended, but everybody else is participating. We have about
everyone else can see it.
26 have answered.
Okay, awesome.
27.
So the first poll, good thing I have written down the questions. What is your experience working with or in the government? So the first option is I've mostly worked as a government employee. The second is I've mostly worked as a government contractor. The third is I've worked in both industry and government. Or the fourth is I work in another industry or sector. So if you go ahead and click on that and put your answer in, I'm going to hand it over to Tracy, who will talk to us about the results and then jump over into the discussion. So thank you, everybody, for joining.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for that, Joywind. As she mentioned, my name is Tracy Walker, and I am the Executive Director of the Digital Services Coalition, and happy Public Service Recognition Week. So a little bit about the DSC. We are a nonprofit trade association made up of companies who are experts in digital services and digital transformation. Just as an FYI, we are opening up our membership drive soon. So if you are interested in joining, please check out our website for updates, which she provided. You can also get in touch with me personally, and I can give more information on that. So just a little housekeeping and come join us kind of statement for us before we get started. So it looks like the poll results have kind of come in, and it looks like we have around 59% of everyone here has mostly worked as a government contractor. We have about 14% that have worked as mostly as a government employee, myself included. I have worked both in industry and government at 24%, and 10% is I work in another industry and sector. So thank you to everyone who's joining in. And this is kind of shows, we definitely have a very, kind of heavily industry-based conversation, but love the fact that there are people who have spent a lot of time, as government employees. And what we really are trying to talk and have this discussion about is kind of understanding the digital government workforce. So not only just the people who have, only worked for the government or the other people who have worked only in industry, but where does that line start to blend, and what does that look like as we go forward into the future? So one of the things that we are going to talk about today with our panelists is understanding the motivations and opportunities of having those career choices that can lead someone to work for the government at any level. We have state, federal, county, Indian, tribal reservations that people are working in. And so, we really kind of want to figure out what does it look like for somebody to want to make that decision to work for the government and then also work in tech. I have completed 20 years in the government. I made my first jump into industry this past year, which was great, but that really isn't a typical career trajectory even for a federal employee anymore. Most of the time when I started, it was like, okay, you're going to do your time here as a government employee, you'll go till you retire. And that point, you'll start looking at what industry opportunities are out there. And that has really changed over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, especially in the area of tech, in the CIO offices, in the digital transformation offices, as more and more opportunities to kind of blend that line have come out and been made available to both government and industry. I think the idea that we're also kind of talking about a little bit today is the idea of boomeranging, which is where we've had people that come in and join the Presidential Innovation Fellows, US Digital Service, 18F, and have done a term of service where they've come in, taken a hiatus or a sabbatical from their current job, come into government, serve for a very specific term, whether that's 6 months to potentially even 2 years or a little bit longer, gone back into industry, and then decided that there was still more work they could do on the government side. So kind of coming back. And that's looking at that term, we're calling that boomeranging. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that looks like for the trend that's kind of happening because of that. And also, how do we keep our digital transformation skills current? And how do we kind of upskill the government as it needs to also understand, how you get to digital service transformation? These skill sets that aren't necessarily in government right now, what does it look like to bring those in? So I'm going to turn it over to my speakers right now to kind of give an introduction to them as well, to hear their stories. We want to have them walk them through their career from both the public and the private industry aspect. And we also want to know what called you to serve in the government and how has that impacted your decisions in your career path and the jobs you take or would like to take as a result of this. So I'm going to start off with Robbie Holmes. He has joined us today. So he is a former coworker of mine back at U.S. Digital Service. He also has been part of the DSC before going back to work in government at the county level. So can you please take some time to tell us who you are and what inspired you to work in the government?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My background is really varied. I started my career working at an internet web hosting company probably 28 years ago at this point, but then slid into working for state and city government. At the state level, I was working for the DSS, which was the Department of Social Services in New York State for welfare, and then eventually moved over to the Human Resources Administration for the city of New York. Both times I was a contractor, but eventually became a provisional civil servant for the city of New York. And I was running the Network Operations Center. And at that point, I decided I wanted to try to do something else. I was transitioning from traditional IT to development. And I ended up moving out of the government at that point to work for Sony Music. So I went to Sony and then eventually Zagat Survey and got acquired by Google and bounced around a bunch. So I got a chance to do a lot of things in a lot of different industries, and then eventually left Google, went to Johnson & Johnson, where I sort of led up the team that was building out all the public facing websites. And then I got to phase 2, which is a company I've known for a really long time. They do a lot of large scale websites and they do contracting to both the private industry and to federal government. And at that point, I read a blog post where Mikey Dickerson talked about healthcare.gov and about sort of walking in the door and asking questions like, how do you know when healthcare.gov is down? And them saying like, hey, we turn on the news, and if we're getting yelled at on CNN that healthcare.gov is down, we know it's down. And he's like, we know how to monitor things, So it resonated with me really hard because, as much as the work I did for the city and state of New York was some of the most effective, it was difficult. I spent a lot of time in the welfare centers, and you bring a lot of that home. I felt like that work was really productive and really had a lot of value to not just the people of the city of New York, but the taxpayers, right? I ended up like migrating a bunch of stuff to open source and trying really hard to save money for our state and city level governments. And when I read this, I was like, well, I could use my new skills to help America. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I applied to USDS, and that sent me down the trajectory of working for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I eventually moved over to the headquarters team as part of the Executive Office of the President, and then slid around all over the place, went over to USDA and DHS, and helped out on farmers.gov and a few other places. So I felt a lot of impact through that time. And I did the full 4 years at USDS, so two-year tours of duty. And at that point decided I wanted to try something different. And I went off to one of the DSC firms, to Pluribus Digital, a couple of folks in the audience today, where I was the VP of product development. And then I had a really weird background where I ended up buying a home in Prince William County and joking with my wife that we should look and see if there's anything there for her. And then I saw that they had a director of software engineering role open. And after a couple of conversations and talking to the CIO here, Rob Mancini, I was able to convince them that it might be a little bit larger than director of software engineering, and explaining sort of what digital services and digital services modernization was. And over time, it ended up happening. I founded a business and started working for Prince William County. So I'm currently the director of digital services and software engineering for PwC, for Prince William County here in Virginia. So trying to help be an advocate for and lead up how we approach things from a digital services perspective.
Thank you so much for that, Robbie. I'm going to turn it over to Jessie Bull from GSA. She is a former board member of the Digital Services Coalition, so we're excited to see you back in government, though, at GSA. We hated to lose you, but we understand, again, the call. So yeah, please tell us more about your journey.
Sure, and thanks for having me, and good to see everyone again. So I have taken, I think this is probably a theme that y'all will hear today, but taking a little bit of less traditional path, starting to wonder what a traditional path actually looks like. But I started my career working in government, not really in technology at all. So I'm maybe a reverse boomeranger, I think, from others here, but I was drawn to government early because I've always been drawn to complicated problems. I'm kind of happiest in the gray areas where questions come in tangled webs and solutions are rarely singular in nature. So I started in federal oversight. I worked for the Government Accountability Office, evaluating procurement efficacy and the adoption and impact of some major federal legislative changes and identifying opportunities for course correction across a number of different areas. And my engagement with tech actually started there. I joined an internal working group that looked at how our products were being used by our customers and how we could take advantage of different technology uses to make them higher impact. And then I moved into local government, worked for the City and County of San Francisco for a year, looking at healthcare management systems and transportation level, the municipal level, which is a whole other sort of ball game. And then I shifted into the federal state intersection when I worked at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service for the Western region. So I managed a portfolio of technology projects for 14 different state agencies there, as well as a series of operational areas like grocery store operations and management, certification, enrollment policy, clinic experience, and procurement. And I really saw the challenges and opportunities of technology there and to change the way that people experience the program. So how different technology choices can influence the experience of families as they navigate their benefits, how they relate to other services that they're getting, and opportunities that kind of lay within that space. So I wanted to dig in more on the development process. So I moved into the tech industry, where I spent a couple of years in strategy operations and project management, primarily for safety net programs. And then I came back into the government again last fall at the federal level because I wanted to be part of the decision-making process as these huge federal technology initiatives are being rolled out. So this administration has made customer experience and the role technology plays in customer experience really front and center. And I wanted to be on the government side of things, kind of helping to figure out how to make these things happen. So now I'm working for the administrator at GSA, helping to coordinate our agency's response to the customer experience executive order and the customer experience pillar of the president's management agenda. That's me, and excited to talk more.
Thank you so much for that, Jessie. Love one of the big themes you always hear when people are joining in is that being able to help families and being able to help people that are in your life and getting to see that from the government perspective and being part of that mechanism is always a big theme when you ask people why do they want to work on these hard, gnarly problems and stuff. And so thank you, Jessie, for the work that you did in that. I'm going to have Mateo join us now. And he is working as a communications and change management consultant for Wheelhouse and is focused at the IRS. He's also helping us at the DSC as our communications chair. So I've kind of roped him into helping out a little bit there. Thank you so much for that. So Mateo, can you tell us about your story?
Sure. I think, just right off the bat, like Jessie mentioned, we're going to see some parallels here. But I really appreciate events like this because it offers, an opportunity to really reflect on lessons I've learned earlier in my career and still carry with me today. So, when I look back at how I got here, working with Wheelhouse Group, and we'll kind of get through that storyline, but the road is rarely a straight one. Like, what is traditional experience at this point? But my service in government started with the Peace Corps back in 2011. So I joined with very loose ideas of what I wanted to do professionally, but at the core of it all, I knew I wanted to help people. And so from 2011 to 2014, I lived in Peru, worked primarily with young folks, focusing mostly on health. I worked directly with the youths, facilitating health and sexual education sessions. And then eventually that kind of snowballed into working with the people who work with the youths, teachers, community health workers, all sorts of folks. And that continued to snowball into working with the people who work with those people. So we're talking government and Ministry of Health officials, nonprofits, et cetera. So really the scale just kind of kept increasing. And all of this really gave me a better understanding of not just, Peruvian systems, but also how the US government engages with those systems. So, when I think about the skills that I learned there, it's really a combination of like anything really, hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills being community assessments, survey development, grant writing, data analysis on various levels, small towns of 3,000 people to regional level groups of like 850,000. Some of the soft skills, cultural fluency, adaptability, empathy, things like that, that I say soft skills, but people skills, which tend to have higher value, I think, in even in virtual environments. So came back to the States 2014, went to grad school, got my master's of public health, and I'm based in DC. So if any of you are here, hi. I also don't be surprised if you hear sirens in the background because it is DC. So, but I spent some time in grad school, finished up there, and worked at USAID for a couple of years. As a communications analyst in the Bureau for Global Health, working with our senior level staff to really ensure a cohesive voice for the Bureau and help tell the USAID and US government story, not just here in the US, but around the world. So I think that experience was really helpful in getting a sense of how an international government agency works inside and out, collaborates across federal government, interacts with Congress, contractors, and really got to see how an agency like that engaged in technology and with a broader emphasis in the past couple of years on digital health and really incorporating technology into the programs and projects that they do all around the world. So that brought me to Wheelhouse Group, where I'm working to support the International Revenue Service. You may have heard of them. It is May. So not hopefully that's not too triggering for anybody in the audience. But this is working at Wheelhouse Group has been a really interesting opportunity to hone, like I said earlier, soft skills and hard skills. But with an organization like Wheelhouse Group, really it's a group that is people focused, and being able to go from private to public, or excuse me, in my case, public to private, it's been really important to not just have a background in communications and even, like I said, working with data, all sorts of things, but having these sort of core competencies that allow me to adapt and shift in a space that IRS wasn't familiar with the IRS before this, but now they're my primary client, and I get it. So I had a brief story to share, but I'll hold that to the end. Really, what I see as a kind of overall point is, technology is a tool that we have, but the human experience is what makes it real. And so as long as we continue to keep people at the focus and the center of our conversations as we're enacting these sweeping technological initiatives, I think we're setting ourselves up for success there. And Tracy, back to you.
Thank you so much. I love what you just said there about keeping people as the focus. I think that is definitely a big deal, especially when you have those international challenges as well, and you realize, okay, that all these things are hard, but everyone kind of has some of the same basic needs, and government has that like responsibility to providing that. So even across borders and boundaries, those challenges are still kind of probably going to be met with similar solutions and similar thoughts as well. So thank you so much, Mateo, for joining us. And last but definitely not least, Cara DeFrias she is now working at the Executive Office of the President of the White House. She is a senior advisor in the Office of Technology at the White House. And Cara, we have crossed paths in many of different variations of where you kind of worked between 18F and the White House in different places. So love seeing you and hearing your experiences, when you've talked in different places and stuff. So we're really, thankful that you're joining us here today. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey and what has called you to serve, and what are your skills that you're really taking from this and building?
Yes, and just to let you all know, the reason I am wearing a Team USA, U.S. Women's National Team soccer jersey is because we hosted Team USA at the White House today, and we were encouraged to show our team spirit. And I totally forgot I had this afternoon, so you are getting me in my full USA gear. Thank you all for
I think it's appropriate to have your USA gear on at any time, so it's all good.
There we go. So thanks to Wheelhouse Group and Tracy and everybody, first of all, for having us today. Second of all, the thing you all need to know off the top is that I am just a kid from Jersey that was supposed to be a high school English teacher. On most days, I have no idea how I got here. And, my pronouns are she, her, my Twitter's Cara DeFrias, and then my website is caradefrias.com. So you can go read about my career there. I'd love to spend kind of the intro getting into my why. So why yes to public service? Why yes to moving across the country? This is my third time coming from San Diego to DC to do this work. And my why is because I actually give a shit about the people who we're here to serve and the people we show up with every day. The super short version of my background is I got into government service because I saw a tweet from a guy named Todd Park, actually almost this week, 10 years ago. And I'm so gonna cry. Oh my gosh, I'm not sorry for that, but whew. We were part of the first class of Presidential Innovation Fellows, and we were the people who were the human guinea pigs on this grand hypothesis of whether technologists will come to government and serve a tour of duty. And I saw the tweet, somebody retweeted him into my timeline on Twitter, and it said, we are looking for a few good women, he purposely said that, and men to serve their country in the first class of Presidential Innovation Fellows. Now, as somebody who has worked in the top of all the industries I've been in, I worked in entertainment. My first gig was on the Oscars. I worked in pro sports. My first gig was Women's World Cup 99, and I went on to also work on the Super Bowl halftime show. Our halftime show was Sting, No Doubt, and Shania Twain, which was so much fun. And it's nothing I ever set out to do. When I say I'm a kid from Jersey who's supposed to be a high school English teacher and coach soccer, it's the God's honest truth. But I saw the tweet, and I was at Intuit at the time. I was working on TurboTax, which is interesting, right? Because TurboTax is arguably the biggest intersection of the government and the private sector, right? We help people do something that is terribly confusing, which is taxes. So I was working on that at the time. Intuit also has a program called the Innovation Catalyst Program, where we help unlock design for delight and get it into the DNA of employees. And I was there for a total of 9 years, but I was the ultimate boomeranger. So I was selected to be in the first class. There was only one paragraph on whitehouse.gov explaining what this new Presidential Innovation Fellows thing was. And I took a leap of faith. I applied. I was like, this is really close to the Innovation Catalyst Program. And it turns out it was really close to it. So out of a class of, or applicant pool of almost, and by the way, I'm looking at this because I have my 5 minutes set on here like a good speaker. Out of a class or a pool of 800 applicants, they picked 18 of us. And I will point out of the 18 they selected, they only picked 2 women. I was definitely the slacker of the 2. Marina Martin, who is now Marina Martin Nitza, went on to be the CTO of the VA. So she won that one. But it was just so thrilling to be part of that. And what we proved out was the hypothesis worked. People will leave the private sector. So I came here for 6 months. I was a fellow. Then I boomeranged back to Intuit for a few years. And then in 2012, saw Todd Park again because people from USDS, 18F, and the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program were talking at a tech conference in San Francisco about how this wonderful experiment they had done 3 years earlier was taking off like gangbusters. So I went backstage afterwards, I hugged and high-fived everybody, and Todd said, we need you back. So I came back for the final 2 years of the administration, left the private sector again, And I started off at 18F. I was senior advisor to the executive director and the senior leadership team. They weren't allowed to call me chief of staff because the head of GSA said that would make 18F sound too official. So we settled on senior advisor as my title. And then I was taking a class at Georgetown in February of 2016. And at State of the Union, 3 weeks prior, President Obama announced the cancer moonshot. And as a 3-time cancer survivor, it was incredibly meaningful to know we were going to be the country to kick cancer's ass. And I was at this class at Georgetown up on the Hill. It was called How Congress Works. I will let that joke sink in for a minute. And I knew I had to get involved, but I didn't know how. And then I got a phone call. I was taking that class, and it was the Vice President Biden's head of digital, who said, "We need you on the moonshot." We talked for a half hour. And at the end, the last thing I said to Lindsay before we got off the phone was, I wasn't born to do this work. I survived to do this work. So I came over and worked on the moonshot as director of experience design for 11 months. We kicked ass, we took names, we launched a lot. Went back to private sector at the end of the administration, and then came back last March, and I'm senior advisor in the Office of Technology. My why is because the work we all do matter. You all matter. I thank all of you, and it's a really big honor to be here today. So I'll throw it back to you, Tracy.
Well, thank you. Now that you've got us all verklempt, thank you so much for your passion and dedication on this. So we're going to get into a little bit more of those stories and going into the questions on this. But before we do, we are going to kick it off with another poll real quick. So the questions on this one is, what skill set do you think will best serve the digital service movement in government? Policy wonk, bureaucracy hacker, special unicorn, end user whisperer, accessibility evangelist. And I think there's a little, tongue in cheek when it comes to this kind of thing, because these were terms and ideas that I would say prior to a lot of people coming in from this, digital movement and stuff, these were terms that were not flung around in the government. Unicorns and hackers were not things you talked about with people and stuff. And so the fact that these terms are becoming more and more prevalent and understood and coming in from industry, and then we're seeing that blend, I think shows that one of the big things that we do need to talk about and understand as we move forward into the future is that common language, and how do we talk about special skills and the needs and everything that people are going to have once they come into a government environment, and how do we kind of normalize it a little bit more with what an industry environment is. So the responses are in. So nobody thinks we need to be a policy wonk. 36% of us need to be a bureaucracy hacker. That's going to be a good term. Special unicorn is at 9%. The end user whisperer is at 32%, and the accessibility evangelist is at 23%. So we're pretty split between bureaucracy hacker, end user whisperer, and accessibility evangelist. So I think that's great to hear. So if I can have all of my panelists join me again on camera. Hello again. So in 5 years, if this trend of kind of boomeranging continues, what are things that should be implemented in either the private or the public side that makes it easier for people to look at doing a term in government? And I'll throw it over to Jessie to kind of kick us off.
Sure. I guess I think about two different things. I guess when I think about individuals as they're looking at their own careers and trying to kind of navigate those decisions for themselves, I think a thing that I would love people to think about is just that there are differences in the value that careers or work experience in both private sector and public sector can offer, but they're one is not necessarily better or worse than the other. I think they're just quite different. Industry, I think from a perspective, often moves faster than the government and can provide a great chance to really execute and learn how to kind of go, how fast can you go, how big can you go? But government offers a really wide impact and a chance to really figure out the why So being in government means you can be a part of the decision process, which is often messier, definitely slower, and has lots of webs to untangle. But the impact you can have is really long range. And so I think working in both arenas can really develop different skill sets and perspectives. And I think it's really valuable both for individuals as they kind of move through their careers, but also for the organizations that hire these folks, is being able to understand and navigate multiple needs and perspectives. I think is really valuable for everyone involved. I think that government and industry are most effective when they partner together, and being able to effectively partner means being able to understand each other.
Great, thank you. Mateo, what do you think about this?
With everything that Jesse just said, I think the need to partner is really strong. And with this question, it brings up a couple things for me. I know this exists in some capacity already, but when I think about just what would draw me to kind of swing back and forth and really complete my boomerang, maybe even a couple laps, I think about opportunities for details, fellowships, whatever we want to call them, but really focused learning opportunities that allow for a time limited exchange to share knowledge and best practices, for just more seamless work between private and public sectors that can ultimately lead to stronger public-private partnerships. So again, I know these exist, but really just maybe better visibility of these, more accessibility, more equity. I can just keep saying words that end with Y, but I'll leave it there for now.
I'm gonna kind of flip this just a little bit, Kara, but like, is this a trend that should continue? What are the downsides to the idea of boomeranging, or what would be things to prevent those if there were downsides?
I want to yes and both of the earlier panelists' comments, and I would really be remiss if I didn't bring up the concept of privilege in all this. I think as long as you make people come to Washington, D.C., or as long as you don't pay your interns, these are things that it's not equitable for people. Some people, they can't move away from their family, or they can't take a lower paying job, or they can't take a benefits cut. And some of our best talent that's out there isn't able to come in for a variety of reasons, including these ones. So I think the best we can do to make this attractive, this going back and forth. I mean, in the beginning, our hypothesis was, oh, we'll get the Googles and the big tech companies to do sabbaticals. I was fortunate that my company at the time just looked at it as a 6-month personal leave of absence. I will say there was a trip up where in the first class of PIFs, Presidential Innovation Fellows, we didn't get benefits. We didn't get paid. We got paid pretty low on the scale, but we didn't get benefits. And so again, as a 3-time cancer survivor, I found out as I was literally before I took my oath of office, oh, we need you to talk to HR, and we need you to re-sign all your paperwork because we actually can't give you benefits. I'm like, and I had just moved here from San Diego, to be clear. And so I was like, that's not gonna work. So we had to renegotiate on the spot, figure out how much COBRA was gonna cost me, times that by monthly payments, 6 monthly payments, and they ended up giving me a quote unquote raise. But had I known that before, I wouldn't have gotten on the plane. So I think we really need to look at employees as entire humans that have lives and responsibilities and have different levels of privilege, to make sure we're not just compensating them monetarily and with the allure of this amazing opportunity to have, which is impact at scale. And so I think it's got to be a holistic look at the people, and not just pulling a lever here or a lever there to make these things happen.
And you brought up a great point. I want to give a shout out to our HR people who have absolutely taken that bureaucracy hack for a lot of these different digital service positions and programs as they've come in to try to figure out how to make it work in the crazy rules that they have to do. So thank you to our tireless HR specialists who have helped out making this thing work. So, and Robbie, I didn't want to give you a chance to answer as well.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of evolution that's been happening in the hiring process across the board. And there was the SME pilot that happened through OPM that USDS was a part of. I think it's very dissuading to somebody who is willing, who has the privilege to want to join the government and drop everything they have to then end up in a 6-month pipeline where they are told they are not qualified to do the job that they were qualified for 10 years ago, because of the way that their resume is reviewed, because of the way that the process has been done. There's been a lot of change and a lot of movement, but I think that is one of those things that is absolutely devastating to trying to get people who are enthusiastic to come and join federal government. I've seen people like, we've talked a lot about, we joked about it a lot in the USDS time period. Like, if you have done drugs in the past, be transparent, talk about when it was. All those things are better today, right? Like, I think the bigger problem is when we stick someone into a long process without a clear understanding of the timeline and about how long it can take, and then they're told at the end of it that their experience is not valid for the government. It compounds the problem of basically creating a negative connotation to go work for the federal government, and that stinks. I was lucky enough to come in and join USDS, but I think if I had gone through the application process and because I don't have a college degree, was told I couldn't do this, even though I had been a director of engineering and I had run teams at Johnson & Johnson and Sony and all these other companies, worked at Google, that would have devastated me. And I would have been very anti joining government at that point, right? Like, I've seen people end up in that position where they're like crushed because they are so excited about the possibility of coming and having an impact. And then their hopes and dreams are smashed because of some bureaucracy in the hiring process.
Yeah, I'm just going to yes and that real quick. Like, huge shout out to the team at 18F that put together a blog post on how to write a resume for government. Shout out to USDS and the SMEQA team, TTS, who's trying to go through a bunch. Like, we have to acknowledge there are people and movements that are trying to move this forward. It is writing a Titanic as it's approaching the iceberg, though, right? So like, I don't want to sound like, and Robbie, I won't speak on your behalf, but like, I'm not dogging on any of this. Like, one, we're calling out privilege, and two, definitely want to highlight the people who are moving this forward in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think, the example I give because of my USDS background is like, we changed the hiring process specifically for USDS. And it was originally the joint pipeline with 18F, right? Where it was a different experience than going through USA Jobs. And that was unique for a little while. And I think that is influencing a lot of these other things. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are working on the bureaucracy hacking of the hiring process. And there's a lot of great work that's being done. I just think that I've seen people apply and be crushed. And like, having a significant other of someone who's already in government get told they can't join because they don't have qualifying work when they're getting a PhD in the subject matter, right? Like, things like that are just so devastating to the person working in the government, the person trying to come in. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that I think we could be better about in approaching how we recruit people and how we shepherd them through the process.
Well, and I think that kind of piggybacks to my next question, which is around the kinds of skill sets and key roles that are not traditionally in government that for the most part have kind of been outsourced. If you look at government history and the trends, it was that all of our scientists and specialists had to be members of the government. So you had to pass the civil service exam, you had to be an expert in your field. We're talking about like building rockets and stuff like that. And then there was a big trend where all of those skill sets were kind of outsourced and now kind of in the hands of industry. And I think this is a little bit of seeing that kind of pendulum kind of come back. So we've talked about, along with digital service and digital trends, we look at UX designers and researchers, we look at product management, developers familiar with DevOps practices, site reliability engineers, of course, cyber security has its whole huge world of things. What other skill sets or areas of expertise do you think government is missing out on in this kind of trend, or that you've seen in industry that really should be kind of brought in or leveraged in, that people are listening and saying, okay, we've already got our foot in the door for some of these roles, how do we start bringing in others, or how do we show that these are the special roles that kind of need to be brought in? And that can piggyback a little bit around the idea of the customer experience as well. So Matteo, do you have any thoughts on that?
mic check. Speaking of technology,
There you
sure.
go.
First, I just want to, both Robbie and Kara, you're going to break my neck by the end of the session. I'm just like over here nodding like yes and snapping. My hands are dry, just already too much snapping going on. But no, I think it's really interesting to see not just like the evolution from specific positions in fields, but also the government's recognition to in broadening just the hiring pool in general, right? We're seeing a lot of initiatives that are coming out with this, well, not so new administration, with the current administration, just really pushing for broadening the diversity of their hiring pool, not just in skill sets, but also backgrounds, ethnicity, gender, just all these like really critical topics that create really ultimately the best product that you can create. Just having differing opinions, all focused on one sort of primary central goal. I think I think that just as a broad principle, I think that's just, we'll call it a best practice, it will help us get to where we need to be. So yeah, Jesse, I see you. Go for it, Jesse.
This is like, I have a thing.
Jump in, please.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I think that a thing that's really exciting to me is I think we are starting to see some evolutions beyond just sort of how do we get some people in the door. I feel like there was a little bit of kind of emergency response that has happened over the last few years of just like how do we bring in experts to like help us with these complicated technology problems. And I think now some of the conversations are really shifting into how do we make this more long term? How do we think about teams as a whole? How do we think about organizations having capacity in-house and being able to partner effectively with vendors for different things? Like, who are we hiring for where? And I think a thing that I'm really excited to have seen this year is GSA and this administration, in partnership with this administration, helped launch the US Digital Corps, which is the first full-time paid fellowship program for early career technologists, which I think is super exciting to not only be talking about how do we bring in these mid or senior career experts and think about how do we motivate them to take on public sector problems, but also how do we engage with communities that are just sort of starting out, and how do we get them to think about their career trajectories differerly and to consider kind of starting out in the federal government and building their skill sets that way. And I think kind of similarly, a thing that I'm also seeing happening that I'm excited about is I think, a skill set that I think we don't maybe talk about as much in the federal space, but that I think is really important is not just kind of bringing in individual technical capacities, but also the ability to work with cross-functional agile teams. So being able to help build those teams effectively, understanding how like design and engineering can balance and counterbalance each other, and the roles that product management and program management can play in that, I think is really important to longer term and sort of institutional success. And so I'm hoping to see bigger conversations and more conversations happening around not just what is the pipeline and who we're bringing in, but also when they get here, how are they being set up for success? How are we thinking about engaging teams in more holistic ways?
Wait a minute, designers and engineers are allowed to talk now? I didn't get that memo yet. Okay. I'm catching up now. That kind of, and you're thinking, that brought up a great point around like non-traditional tech backgrounds. Where, Kara, you'd mentioned earlier that, you're a theater major. I personally am a history major who, fell into government contracting and happened to be IT, and everything I've learned about IT has been on the job. Never once took a course or anything in technology, but I'm actually considered a technologist. So how do you see that kind of thing that trend continuing, where you're pulling people from like maybe in the government with non-traditional tech backgrounds, or also from campuses and universities, or even high schools and trade programs, and pulling them up into this tech world and making it more acceptable to say, yes, I can actually be part of this as well, even if I don't have that tech background?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because as an undergrad, I started out as a physical therapy major, made it through my first semester with a 2.18 GPA. Gen Bio and Organic Chem just slayed me. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem fun anymore. So I switched to theater and English. And I'd never done theater before. I started out, I tried out on a lark because I actually didn't make the college's soccer team. I was like, well, what am I going to do for 4 years now? And I was walking the student center and I saw a flyer for Brendan Behan's The Hostage. And I'm like, well, I'm half Irish. I do a great accent. I have nothing to lose. And here we are, everybody. And many, many, many years later. So it's one of those things where my background, I got into tech because I was an instructional designer. That's my master's from Penn State. Shout out to any Nittany Lions on the call or watching me programming afterwards. Proud public school grad. And I'm one of those people, it's proof you have to go to some fancy school with some big price tag to do cool shit for your country, right? And one thing I want to get into your answer, but I also want to call out, we talk a lot about impact at scale. And sometimes you get into government and you make one change on one page of a very large website of a very large agency. And to the hundreds or thousands of people who need that one page to be working, you could change their lives. So it's not always about the ground gestures. It's not always about the home run. Sometimes it's a bunt or a base hit that you are affecting thousands of people's or millions of people's lives. So I just kind of want to plug that in for a second. From a background perspective, my first job out of college, I was a photojournalist. And the paper was a small enough paper, only 100,000 circulation outside of Philly, that some days I was also the reporter. And I think the skill sets that are most interesting to working in government, number one with a bullet is curiosity. You've got to be curious because you're coming in sometimes as an outsider technologist and you're talking in a language that people don't get and they're talking in a language that you don't get. And so until you want to understand each other, be curious truly about each other. So I think curiosity is number one. I think your naivete is number two. I remember we got our welcome to government letter in 2012 from the head of the White House Office of Digital Technology, who was our team sponsor. So I worked on a project called MyGov, which fast forward 10 years is now login.gov. So sometimes it's a very slow process. But we stood outside of GW, a couple blocks away, George Washington University. We knew when the students were switching classes, so we gave out $5 gift cards to do usability on the very first iterations of what would be login.gov, because we were curious and we wanted to know how people would use this thing. It was a paper prototype that we, said, where would you tap? And so I think curiosity is big. I think naivete. So the letter we got from the head of ODS said, we picked all of you on this team because you didn't seem to be assholes. Don't prove us wrong. And so that naivete, that was the first bullet. The second bullet was, don't lose your naivete when you come here. The fact that you don't understand how government works, the fact that you don't understand how some of this technology works is actually your biggest asset. So keep asking why, right? And in user research, and you actually say, ask the 5 whys. So curiosity, naivete, I think wanting to understand and coming from a place of humble inquiry, assume the person you're talking to 2 things. They actually are good at their job. Career civil servants are the backbone of our country, and we have so much gratitude to give them. We would not be here without them. And 2, assume that the idea you're coming up with has been thought of 3,000 times before you got here, right? And so civil servants have been here decades before us. They will be here for decades after us being the boomerangs. And so come with the curiosity, come with that true north truly in place of why you are here. Figure out your why before you get here, because when the days are long and the days are hard and you're crying in your office or on a panel with 43 wonderful humans you've never met or some that you have, you can point back to that why. In fact, to that point, remember my story earlier when I said, I told her I wasn't born to do this work, I survived to do it. She wrote it on a buck slip and put it in her, oh, come on. There we go.
There you go.
She put it in her binder. And so when I started 3 weeks later, she showed this to me. And when I left, she gave this to me. And this is my why. This is my why. And so, I think the non-traditional things that ladder up nicely are journalists. The amount of lawyers I met working at 18F who weren't there to be lawyers, who were coders, was astronomical. So, I've always heard that the largest number of majors that make it into law school are English majors. It's because you look at something, you dissect it, you understand it, and then you act on it. And so I think any career where that's the mindset would make for a good person in government.
I think you and I are like so aligned in so many ways, Kara. I wish we had gotten to work together in our time in government, because my at USDS, when you leave, a lot of times you get to do a pop off. Mine was during the beginning of the pandemic. So I sent an email to everybody at USDS. And one of the things I said in there was like, assume the people who came before you actually tried to solve this problem, and read what they left you behind. At the VA, we enforced that when decisions were made, that we wrote a decision document and left it for people in the future. So that way it wasn't starting from scratch all the time, because every time somebody comes in, they're like, well, that's simple. Well, secondarily, let's remove all those words from your vocabulary. Simple, easy, just, those things are absolutely going to crush you, everyone around you, especially the career civil servants who have been working at this for 15 or 20 years. You should turn around and say, like, this looks like it should be a simple problem. Can you explain to me why this hasn't been solved before? Or tell me about the 3 times we tried and it failed, right? Like, those are the kind of things that are unbelievable. Like, but my last thing to them was like, remember when we came here to USDS, we were all like a group of people that called each other on our own BS. Stop just calling out your agency partners, call one another out on your BS, right? Like, there's something amazing to be able to say, like, one of the USDS values is find the truth and tell the truth. That should go off in every direction. You should be able to turn to your left and right of your quote unquote, like, adopted family and say, like, why are we doing this? Or is this right? And I feel like that is one of those things that kept coming up near the end of my time, which is like, we have to be able to say, like, but why, to one another sometimes, right? Like, and you should be able to answer that without getting defensive. It's okay for us to question. That's why we're here. That intellectual curiosity. Sometimes it's like, has anyone talked to a user? What have we confirmed this is still really a problem, right? Like, those are reasonable things that you should ask kind of every day, right? The discovery sprint document out of USDS, one of the things I love about it is at the end of the day, it says, is the problem we came here to discover still the problem, right? Like, because it may have been reported as a different thing and we found out something in the process that proved it's not, but that doesn't mean we're done. We just need to focus differently. Like, that inquisitive nature should be in every day of your life. I think it's so perfect the way you captured it, Kara. Thank you.
Fun fact, I wrote the discovery sprint document with Kathy Fan. You can get it on LinkedIn.
I know, it's amazing. I listened to the podcast where Kat talked about it and all of those things. It's so great. But that last line, that last aspect every day of like 6 o'clock at night, we're like, hey, is this still the problem? Right? Like, is so important, because I think that's the thing that gets lost. We can all look into these things. It's questioning whether or not it's still the right thing. And I think that is the aspect I love the most of that document.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Mateo, did you have any thoughts on that before we jump to the next question?
Yeah, I did. And again, I'm breaking my neck over here. I think, apart from, I think Kara taking all the opportunities to curse. I'd love to get into some curse words as well. But I think, I was going to say, just as somebody who's new to tech, not so new to government, but I'm coming up on my 8-month anniversary, I think, in a couple of weeks. So much of this is new, and I love your comments about just having just a deep curiosity for learning and coming in with a giant slice of humble pie, because I don't know squat, and the longer I can maintain that mentality, the more I'm going to learn. So I think for me, what the appeal was of joining in the tech, oh no, your window's too small, I can't read it. But the one of the appeals was just, as someone who never really imagined myself working in this field, was I guess just the unlimited potential for growth, right? Like, tech is pervasive, it is everywhere, it is rapidly, growing exponentially, like second by second. So I feel confident that really no matter where I go from here, if again, a couple cycles with the boomerang, I'll be equipped. I'll be a better person for it, better professional for it. And, I guess just in terms of how to support that, this kind of goes back to one of Kara's comments earlier, of just looking at the whole person. You mentioned resume building. You know, when I think about my resume, it's like, all right, I was really taught that my resume should essentially be a list of like outputs and outcomes and a summary of how efficient and productive I am as a professional, because go capitalism. But really it's like, what do those outputs and outcomes say about my core competencies or the core competencies of that person? And as we are, you know, really hiring and looking at building the workforce of the future, we need to get the whole picture. So whatever it takes to get there. And right.
Thank you so much. And feel free to curse bomb away if you can sneak it in there on the next one.
Damn, there we go. I'm done.
Got out of the system. So we touched on it a little bit earlier, and you know, I would not be a responsible moderator if I did not go into the buzzword bingo and talk about customer experience, and that being the hot topic. But of course, you know, with anything, especially in the world of digital service, agile software development, as these trends come through and we try to understand them and also the skill sets necessary to implement them, one of the things I think we from the practitioner standpoint always try to do is keep it away from the concept of being just a buzzword and just the trend that people are doing, because trends come and go, but like actual customer experience and actual user experience are here to stay. So want to talk with Jessie a little bit about what she's doing, but also with the others in how you're interpreting and understanding, you know, the customer experience executive order, as well as what does that look like for the workforce to be able to support it specifically? Because, you know, this topic is huge, but in terms of kind of what we're talking about today and looking to say, how do we look to that future workforce and being able to implement this? And of course, we have some wonderful stories already that we've talked about around the staying curious, and that still all applies, but digging a little deeper, like what is actually needed to kind of really bring customer experience or make this executive order, like going from a paper-based exercise to actual experience change for people who have to interface with government. So Jessie?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a great question and a great topic, and is also one that I love because from my perspective, it is a tangled web and that is the space I love to be in. But I think there is a lot of buzzwordy things around customer experience, and I think that's fine. I think from my perspective, when I think about customer experience and I think about the government, the question that I ask myself is it working? Is the government working? Is it doing the thing that it's supposed to do? And like, how do we know that? And I think that a thing that I love about the way that modern like human-centered design is coming into this conversation is I think it's really putting pressure on that question of how do we know that it's working? So like when I say that my government program is effective or that it's meeting our customer needs, are the people that I'm asking or are the ways that I'm measuring that, are any of them the actual like end users? Is it the actual members of the public, or is it like other administration staff being like, yes, we did this faster, therefore it is working. And so I think that there are some really good conversations happening now and a lot of emphasis on what does the government need to be able to understand who its customers are, reach them, which is a surprisingly complicated bureaucratic issue, but then also to be equipped to respond to them. And I think I love the conversation that has been happening in this panel today about civil servants, and I think particularly around like a lot of civil servants, like, they know where a lot of problems are. Like they've been trying to solve these for a long time, and I think like the answer is not just like, oh, we need a new website or we need to build a website, or like technology is the silver bullet that will somehow solve these problems. But at the same time, I think that what is really required for these initiatives to be successful is that partnership that we've been talking about. It's bringing together the deep expertise that civil servants have around how their programs work, what are the operational constraints and realities that they're facing, like the differences in how programs are funded, in how procurement works. Like they do really matter. It all comes back to procurement, but we have to understand and navigate within that space. And I think technologists can bring a really important part of the story, which is how do we understand our users? How do we connect with them? How do we incrementally build to what they need? So not just like come up with the best like sounding idea, but deliver value in small pieces and like keep going in these small pieces. And so I think what I'm excited to see is kind of both of those sides of the table coming together. So the government understanding its own constraints and being willing to sort of put on a how might we hat to work through those constraints, and for technologists to come in with that deep understanding of what does it mean to break this problem down, what does it mean to test like to name our assumptions and hypotheses and just start testing against them, and like use that as a way to learn, and to take these best practices in development and design, and to say, like, how are we communicating, how are we measuring what it is that we're doing, and how it's working from the perspective of the people who ultimately are using or benefiting from this service.
Thank you. Robbie, any thoughts on it?
I think it's so important to, like somebody mentioned earlier, just putting the user at the center of the process, I think is it's inherently seems like such a simple statement, but it is antithetical to the way that things have been done in government for a really long time, because there was a group of people whose job it was to define requirements, and they would meet once a year for like a month and define what was going to happen. And most of the people who were going to do that work weren't there. Right? They would define all these requirements, and then they would come back to their contractors and say, like, you need to build X in the next year. And like, that is, it sounds silly, but that is the way it had worked for a really long time. And most of the people in that process knew that it was broken and it wasn't working, and they had no ability to change it, you know? And I think that's the one benefit that I can say, like, across the board, things, having a Todd Park come into the White House changed, is like, we now had the ability to like be the broad shoulders of and take the beating, right? Like, we used to joke about that all the time, like, well, what happens if this ends up in a GAO report? Well, I can get yelled at. I have broad shoulders. I'm okay with that, right? Like, just tell them USDS said it was a bad idea, and then I'll take the beating and I'll go talk to Mikey about it, or Matt or Mina, right? Like, it doesn't matter. It's totally fine. I'm here to do this to protect you a little bit, to allow us to make change, right? Like, sometimes to be the person who says, like, I understand this is scary, and I am willing to take and be the umbrella to protect you, to allow us to make the change we have to make right now, right? And they don't have any, like, you know, at I think it was Marina that brought a person who was at the ground level in the VA to the Secretary Bob's office to say, like, this is the problem that has been worked on for years, and this is the person that helped us figure it out. And like, those are the types of conversations that just don't happen, right? So Marina Martin was the CTO at the VA, and Secretary Bob was the secretary at the time. And we literally brought people and got them challenge coined by Secretary Bob and by Deputy Secretary Sloan for helping us solve problems. It wasn't USDS solving them. It was all of us together, right? Like, and I think that is the thing that I keep coming back to, is that, like, we were, you know, there were a lot of articles, and Kara, you probably back me on this. There were a lot of articles written about USDS, especially, that they were like the saviors coming into government. And that actually like hurt our opinion, the opinions of our federal partners so much, and made us seem like we weren't in touch with what the problems actually were. And I kept telling people, like, stop it. Like, we're here to help. Like, I don't know what's broken at the VA. These people who've been here for 20 years do. Like, I'm happy to take their input, you know? Go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, I just want to be super duper clear. That narrative was not created by any of us. That narrative was created by the press. It was
100%, yeah.
it was clickbait. And so, to echo Robbie, we started taking the narrative in our own hands. So I did a panel at Lean Startup Week back in 2017, where I brought Marina, I brought Tiffany Ashley Bell, who founded Human Utility, which it hacks the Detroit water payment system to turn people's water back on, so people like us anywhere in the country can donate to help with that. It had Eduardo Ortiz on it and Vivian Graubard. And so I wanted to be productive because I was so sick of the narrative. And like, I was like, I'm putting it in my own hands. And so I titled the panel, What the Private Sector Can Learn from Government. And we packed the main theater. Like, literally, it was like a theater in SF. And like, the impressions and the tweets we got that day were through the roof, because it's like, I just wanted, you know, to take control of the narrative. Like, people in government are not idiots. They are very smart and very dedicated. And you know what? You can all learn a lot from them. And so, you know, I think that touches on another big part of our responsibility as these, like, tourists, for lack of a better word. I know some people get upset by that, but whatever. you know, when we come into government, it is absolutely one of our jobs to lift up these heroes that have been here forever and who will be here forever and who are doing amazing work. I will venture to say that those of us who come in to do fellowships or short terms, we don't need the accolades. We're fine. And so how are you lifting up those people and throwing shine on them and bringing them along as the partners? Because ultimately for the work to continue, they have to be along for the ride. And so I'm a big believer in giving away the glory and a lot of shine. And so just as much as, you know, folks on the call, you can in your everyday, like I usually when I give talks or speak on panels, I give homework. So for the 28 of you that are left, when you are done today, reach out and send a thank you note or a direct message to somebody who helped you this week and let them know what it meant to you. And I guarantee you're going to make their day.
Thank you so much for that. So we're going to get open this up for questions. See if anybody in the audience has any questions for any of our panelists on anything we've talked about or anything that they've specifically, you know, kind of worked through or worked on when it comes to, you know, being on both, you know, the challenges of kind of straddling the two worlds of government and industry. So you can either put things directly into the chat or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. So I think, Joywyn, are you gonna read the chat questions?
Yeah,
or?
it looks like we have one from Tabby if she wants to come off mute and on video.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, I can go ahead and read it for you. Are you still with us? I'm just looking at the thing. So why don't I go ahead and read it for us? So she says, there's so much amazing experience. Oh, did she come on? I'm sorry.
Yep, she's there.
Okay, perfect. Go for it.
Hi, can you hear me? Hey, I am just in awe with this panel. I didn't come from this industry and I felt like you guys are meeting on my behalf totally today. So thank you so much. But I did have a question, like what kind of myths did you have to debunk for yourself after working in the government trenches? Because me not coming in and learning it, I want to know, like besides, you know, there's a couple of notes in there, but yeah.
I think
you guys can go for it. Yep.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say is federal government is probably one of the places where I think you can have the largest impact. But the problems are not as the ongoing joke is you're not a unique and beautiful snowflake, right? Like these problems have been solved somewhere else. It's trying to convince people that someone who is not in government can help you solve this problem once they start to understand and listen to what the problem really is. And I think for me, it was that I expected everything to be antiquated and not be able to do something modern. Whereas at the VA, we were able to move to the cloud, vets.gov. We built, I oversaw the API infrastructure for almost 3 years. And it was built using Ruby on Rails and it was deployed daily, and things that you didn't expect that were possible in government are possible. And it's, you know, the other one for me is that the government is just made up of people. As a person who grew up in Brooklyn and a kid who had no idea what government was, when I got here and I walked in the door the first day at the Department of Veterans Affairs with Jeff Mayer and Alex Yeller, and they walked me through the floor and they were just like, this is the space. I was like, this looks like the welfare centers. Like it's the same kind of feel. It's like same kind of desk, same kind of chairs. And then I realized like, I just walked through a whole bunch of people who work for the VA. It's just like the city government I work for. It's just people, right? Like, and there's something amazing about getting that perspective of like, the government is made of people. Like it's people who are there trying to solve the problems you think you would also like to solve. Like, just remember that all the time. There's somebody at the other end of that phone or email or whatever, that's a human being trying to help you. And you can be one of those people. That's the thing. It seems so like impossible when you didn't grow up here. Like it's like the film industry, right? Like you can't imagine that there's a job in the film industry if you didn't grow up in Hollywood and your family isn't part of it. The same thing in government. You know, you look across like government, you're like, these are all just good people who came here to do the right thing. You know, like, and I found that really surprising. And it was something I had to debunk for myself. I like didn't know what I was walking into when I joined USDS, except that I could use my skills to help America. That was what I was promised. And then I actually had my mind changed in the first 6 months that like I got a chance to work side by side with amazing humans all over the place, whether it was USDSers, 18Fers, people from the PIF side of the house, but also all the federal employees that I work with side by side every day. It's amazing just how many humans it takes to move the government. And that's something I had my eyes opened on in the first probably 6 weeks I was there.
I would just tack on to Robbie's point. I won't go on too long, but one myth that that I didn't necessarily hold, but I'll say it is a common one, and so Robbie started to touch on that. It's just that the government doesn't care. They don't care about me. They don't know my needs. They don't get it. So I mentioned the IRS is my client right now, and notoriously has maybe one of the worst reputation. But publicly, right? However, since joining and supporting their efforts, I've learned about the passion that their staff has, the passion that like these people have for government service, and how they really view their work as integral to the American system in helping the American taxpayer. So we have folks during filing season who are accessible 24/7, 365 days a year. Right? When things go live, that is their life. They have to be available at 3 a.m. if some system goes down. So to me, like, I don't have that kind of dedication personally. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. However, it's really admirable for people to really, I think, commit their lives and their professions to supporting in that capacity. And that's just one example, right? I'm sure all these panelists have like much more experience really seeing that kind of dedication.
Kara, or Jesse, any thoughts on myths? Yeah.
I would say, many of us have heard the story about Todd Park literally sleeping under his desk here in the White House during the healthcare.gov rescue effort. It's just, we, meaning those of us who come in for a limited term of duty, we have a finite amount of time to make as much impact as we can. I think the things that go by the wayside are sometimes mental health and physical well-being, and those are the things I think that we all need to show up for each other and double down on. And I have a post-it note behind me that says team health check, and the people who are on projects and programs with me know when I ask that, the meeting stops and everyone around the room is brutally honest. And sometimes that means deadline shift, and sometimes that means we end the meeting early or we all go off video. And so I think in particular with those of us who do come in or boomerang is making sure we're looking out for each other as well.
Definitely seeing such a big shift towards that mental health aspect and being more normalized in the government space, because I think of the influence of industry a lot, definitely as well. So that has been one of the positive shifts, definitely, that I've seen. Jesse, did you have something?
Yeah, I think I'm going to flip this question because I can. And I guess from my perspective, like most of my career was in the government. So I think my term of duty was actually like the reverse, where I view working for the tech industry directly as my tour of duty. So for whatever that's worth. But I think a myth about tech that I have seen debunked is that like technology is always the answer. Or always like the right answer, maybe. I think that like a lot of these problems, again, as people have talked about, are complicated and deep rooted and have a lot of history behind them. And sometimes technology can help jump forward, and sometimes it can't. And I think I guess like there are problems that technologists can't necessarily solve, or definitely can't solve on their own. And so I think sometimes there's like a silver bullet type of vibe around tech. It's like, we'll just bring in, like, tech will come in and say it's solved, blah, blah, blah. And I think a thing that I have learned through the development process is it is both much simpler and much more complicated than that. So that's fine, I think.
Okay, last chance. We didn't have any other questions in the chat, but does anybody have any questions for our panelists before we go? Don't be shy. They're very nice to talk to. All right. Well, thank you all so very much for joining us, my friends and speakers. This has been wonderful. It's as that long-term fed and now making my way into industry, I definitely think there is a chance that there is a boomerang on the other end of this. I don't know myself what that looks like, but having the ability to still maintain the friendships and connections with all of you all still, kind of in this space is also one of the big things that I really enjoy about, and one of the things I was very afraid of, and one of the myths actually that I was very curious about is making that jump from government into industry, and how was I going to be now perceived, or how was I going to be, kind of talked to, especially from the government perspective, because I have sat on the other side of those conversations for so long. And I personally have been very happy to know that not a lot has changed, and that people are still going to have the same conversations and still talk to you the same way, regardless of where you're sitting, because to what all the panelists have said, it's the why and what you're doing and how you're supporting government in this movement that really makes the big difference kind of at the end of the day. So thank you all very, very much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Joywyn.
Thanks, Tracy. That was a really awesome hour together. I was reminded of that Dos Equis commercial of the world's most interesting man. I think we have the world's most interesting, gov and industry employees on here today. You guys have had some really cool experiences, and it was, especially in recognition of Public Service Recognition Week, it was really cool to remember kind of the different paths that people take to get here. But the thing that you all share is really this commitment to public service, this curiosity, this naivete, and ability to just keep asking questions. So it was great to see everyone. I do really welcome you if you want to get involved with Stories of Change. If you guys have ideas for panels, for speakers, this is really community driven. So just drop any of us a note. Let us know if there's anyone you want to hear from. I feel like we need like a Todd Park session where it's just Todd Park talking, because he was here. He was here in spirit today. But please do let me know if you have any other ideas for future topics. So thank you again to our panelists, to all our participants. I did want to plug, I know that there's next week on May 11th, they're doing a federal workforce night at the Nats game, playing the Mets. So if you have a jersey like Kara does, come on out. And we have a link there. I know they're running a 25% off code that's available to everybody. So you can come out and celebrate Public Service Week. If you're here in DC or in the area, would love to join you. But again, thank you, everybody. We hope you'll stay involved. Come to Stories of Change. We'll be blogging about this event. And again, we'll be sharing a transcript and a video of the event, so you can share it with your friends and colleagues, or your parents if you're a panelist, or your children. But again, great to see you, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Wheelhouse Group, guiding business and technology change.